further ado, Tom H.
My name's Tom Hooper, and I am an alcoholic. What a great room, as we say. A number of years ago, of course, I was going to speak one time, and Mark Carroll, I'm going to say, well, should I tell you guys everything that's going on in my life? And he said, no, don't tell them everything. Give them some hope. And that's kind of the way I felt today, because I had a little pity party this afternoon, and the nice thing about the pity party, though, is that it was what I thought was going to be a second date, and it wasn't. And rather than being totally devastated, I was just kind of mildly irritated. And I thought, oh shoot. And of course, one of my greatest definitions of a resentment is that they made me change my plans. And that's one of those things about an alcoholic, as they say, the most dangerous place you can ever get is between an alcoholic and between him and something he thinks he's supposed to get. So I certainly filled that quota today. I'm actually going to start with something that I just discovered, or rediscovered, and I liked it because Bill Wilson wrote this in 1947, or actually it's a speech he gave, one of the first recorded talks in Los Angeles in 1947. And it really makes sense because it says, perhaps this is not the place to talk at length of my own recovery or of our AA program in detail or of our astounding growth. This room is filled with fellow alcoholics who know and practice the AA way of life as well as I. The accomplishments of Alcoholics Anonymous are headlined in the press of the world, so I shall be content if I can remind myself and any who would hear that Alcoholics Anonymous is not, after all, a personal success story. It is instead the story of our colossal human failures now converted into the happiest kind of usefulness by that divine alchemy, the living grace of God. And that just, when I found out, actually on the day of my birthday, I remembered that quote. And of course, one of the great things today is you can Google, and you can go Google Bill Wilson, Colossal Human Failure, AA. And it came up, there it was. So already in its entirety. So I just, it really fit. It just fits. Well, anyway, so many of y'all know my story. I was actually trying to think of some new things to tell you, but if I remember any, I'll try. But those of you who know me knew I grew up 30 miles north of here in good old McKinney, Texas. Back when I was there, it was a town of 15,000. My mom was a musician. She played the organ at the First Methodist Church in McKinney, and she also played piano and violin and viola. And my dad was a doctor, and we lived in a nice big white house there on the west side of town, which is now in the historic district. And, every teacher I had, or like three of my elementary school teachers, my dad was their doctor. Oh, your dad's just so wonderful, he's so nice. And your mother is so talented. And, I heard all that kind of stuff. And I was also that little boy with the bow tie sitting on the front row at church every Sunday. And but the thing about all that is that my mom and dad were alcoholics, okay? So what I find interesting is that my two older brothers, while they were living at home, I don't remember mom and dad drinking that much. I think they just, as teenage boys, would go down and say, shut up, or something like that. But as soon as they left town, that's when I immediately realized that they drank a lot and had lots of fights at night and lots of screaming and yelling. And my bedroom was above the kitchen. And so I would go down in the morning, and mom and dad would just whistling, Tommy, what would you like for breakfast, and all this kind of thing. It was just total Jekyll and Hyde, night and day situation. So, they say in our dysfunctional, shame-based families of origin that I am the family representative. I was the mascot. I was, the baby in the family kind of thing. So I didn't, I was the family representative. So we go on into leave elementary school, go into junior high, where they took all the little elementary schools in McKinney and mixed us all together in one spot. It's known as junior high at the time. It's now middle school. And I, of course, even then I knew I was a gay man, but you know, I wouldn't say I hid it, but for the most part, the only time I ever got, let's just say, recognized, as you could say, was there were a couple of guys that, you know, would call me queer, you know, that kind of thing. And of course, that made me shudder. But for the most part, go on. Now, it was in middle school or junior high that I was introduced to diet pills, because my mother was always kind of a little tubby, so she took diet pills, and I've always been kind of a little tubby. And so I asked my dad if I could get some diet pills like Mother was taking, and of course he said, you know, Tommy, a child your age shouldn't take amphetamines. And of course, what did I do immediately? I figured out how to steal them from my dad's office. And literally from then on, I could go to my dad's office and go into the sample room, which was what they had back then when all these detail men would come by and push the drugs on the doctors. And he would just fill up these drawers filled with stuff. And that's where I was introduced to black mollies, which I didn't know were black mollies. They were biphetamine 20s to me. And of course, Dexamyl Spanseals. And my favorite was one called Fetamin, which was made by the Mission Pharmaceutical Company in San Antonio. And it was one with dexedrine in it and vitamins, so it could build yourself up as you tore yourself down, I guess. But it was a vitamin-enriched, you know, amphetamine. Well, anyway, I took those. And of course, I'm in junior high and going into high school, and I probably was sent to the principal's office a lot for talking too much. And but you know, for the most part, kind of going along. I actually had a teacher my junior year in high school who said to me, you know, Tommy, if you think you're going to make it out there in the world on your charm and personality and not have to work, you're crazy. And I mean, one of the first people who saw through me, you know, I guess you could say. And I didn't particularly like Mrs. Benton from then on. She was on my four-step, I can tell you that. And but so we're going on, senior year in high school. Up until that time, I had not really had anything to drink. Now, I took lots of syrup, Histadil cough syrup, which was this wonderful cough syrup with codeine in it that you could take and just feel numb. And I love the amphetamines, but I never really actually drank, okay, because you know, that was awful. Look what it did to my mom and dad. Senior year, senior class song committee meeting. And here we are, you know, in good old McKinney, Texas. Now, back then, McKinney was so far out of Dallas, you could look towards Dallas and there was this glow, the glow of the city lights. And so here I am, senior year in high school, and you can hear the tom-toms beating coming from the big city, you know. And so we had the senior class song committee, and daiquiris were served. And it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. You know, they tasted great, and I felt wonderful. We were all drinking daiquiris and getting drunk, and in fact, my best friend wrecked his car that night on his way home. It was one of those kind of nights. And so on Monday, I go back into the high school in the high school cafeteria, and instead of sitting with that group of kids, I went over there and sat with that group of kids. And, you know, y'all are all here today. Anyway, it was just, you know, I had arrived. From there, I went to the University of Texas in Austin and did not have an illustrious college career, I can assure you. But I certainly learned lots of things, like how to play bridge and to hide those amphetamines that I had, you know, lots of them. But I put them in the medicine cabinet where I thought you were supposed to keep them until somebody said, "Hey, Hooper, where'd you get all those black mollies?" That's when I learned what they were. And what's a black molly? Well, anyway, I learned from then that if I was going to have drugs, I had to hide them and put them in my, you know, dresser drawer. I couldn't put them there anymore. So, because amphetamines, it was harder to get that stuff than just to drink or to, you know, find alcohol. But to get those drugs, it was tough. I literally, I guess, from that senior class song committee meeting, until I got into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I drank every weekend. And it was just a thing that I began to look forward to. And it was something that I thought I was supposed to do. And it certainly enlarged my social life, and I had a lot of fun. And I was in Austin, and Austin is a great place to drink and do drugs. In fact, I was there going to Hippie Hollow before it became famous, I guess you could say. And it was kind of fun. And at night, staying up all night, taking amphetamines, looking at the sunrise, and drinking, of course. This was how I kept all this stuff going. Let's just say that era ended, and I'm coming back, and well, what am I going to do? So I go back home, and I'm living with Mommy and Daddy. Now, one of the things then about living with Mommy and Daddy was, here I am, this homosexual man or boy or whatever, living at home with his Mommy and Daddy. And so I just made I have always had assumptions, never based on facts. These are just assumptions. And I was, well, let's just say at the First Methodist Church, there were lots of men who were there accompanying their mothers. And I just assumed that as a gay man, I was supposed to stay home and live in McKinney, Texas, and when my dad died, I would take care of my mother, and I just assumed that was true. And of course, when I came to Dallas, even before, during that period of time, and say went to the symphony concert, I'd see these young men with these older women. And again, I just assumed they were the children of these older women. Of course, after I came out, I discovered most of them were their hairdressers. And but that, I just had that assumption. I ended up in the plant business, which is essentially what I'm in today. And we started a little nursery, Fairview Nursery, and we started growing stuff, and we opened up a greenhouse, had tropicals and hanging baskets and all kinds of stuff. And of course, what happened was, here we are. This was when a thing known as fern bar and grills. Everybody had ferns and ficus trees in their apartments, and lots of houseplants. Well, what group of people in urban and metropolitan areas want to buy lots of lovely houseplants, but lots of, again, gay men? And so here we are at Fairview Nursery, 30 miles north of Dallas at that time, on Central Expressway. Literally, Central Expressway ended right over there, and our nursery was here. And all of a sudden, these people started showing up. And, of course, I was going click, click, click. And I would take their names and telephone numbers off their checks, go home, and I'd be drinking, and I'd call them, and of course, nothing, ever came of it, but that's what I did, and et cetera. And most of them just kind of hung up. They'd all hung out, and I guess for the most part, they never came back to that nursery again. But one day, a gentleman came to the nursery and from Dallas, and came in, and great looking group of guys and women, men and women in this group, and they were filling up their VW bus at the time with hanging baskets and plants and stuff. And this guy said, well, hey, the next time you're in Dallas, give me a call. Sure, okay. So next time I was in Dallas, which was literally within a few days, I called him up, and he said, come on over. And I went over, and we worked in his yard, and we drank, and we did all kinds of stuff. And then he asked me that question that many of you have probably been asked. Have you ever been to any of the bars? And of course, I told him, well, of course, I've been to, the only one left that I used to go to is the Stoneleigh P, and the Knox Street Pub, and the Grand Hotel, and just a whole list of heterosexual bars, TGI Fridays. And he said, no. Have you ever been to any of the bars? And of course, I did not. I knew exactly what he meant, and we ended up. My introduction to quote unquote gay society in Dallas was we ate fried chicken and had a bottle of red wine in Lee Park. And we got in his car, and it was on one of those Sunday afternoons when they had all the little happy hour tea room things. And so I went, we went to bar to bar to bar for the 10-cent well drinks. Was it 10 cents? I mean, they were cheap. And ended up at a place here in Dallas called the Bayou Landing, which was at the time the largest gay bar in the United States. It was a place called the Pearl Street Warehouse that had been owned by Dallas Cowboys, and then it was taken over by the Bayou Landing folks. And so it was huge, just huge, We had, it had like 12 pool tables in one room. They had a big dance floor. They had a restaurant with a plastic stained glass ceiling. And the most important place was a place called the Tiki Room, or the Tiki Bar, which was down in stairs and in the back in the corner. And Harvey will tell you about the blowfish that were hanging from the ceiling. And actually, that's where I met Harvey, was in that bar many times. And I'd arrived. I thought, oh my God, I've got to move to Dallas. I literally found a job here in Dallas within a few weeks and moved, just left McKinney, came to Dallas. And I went to work for a plant boutique at the time. There was a gentleman that had sold antiques and flowers and potted plants and house plants over on Henderson. And it was very elegant. And we had string quartets on Sunday afternoon. And it was just, this was the way, again, it was supposed to be, Until one afternoon, I was marched into the office, and the owner of the shop had been, I was told, he was in Timberlawn at the time, which, in case you all don't know what that was a big mental hospital here in Dallas, and that lots of people went to. And that I had a drinking problem and I needed to do something about it. And so they sent me to a little place here in Dallas called Casablanca. And Casablanca was what is known in the old days as a jitter joint. And for $256 a week, they would pump you up full of Valium and let you have and feed you meals, 3 times a day. And I was there, 5 days until the tom-tom started beating. And that was on a Saturday afternoon. And I said, how do I get out of here? And they said, well, you need to just pay your bill and get out. And so I paid my bill with a hot check and got out of there. And went back to work until literally the day after Christmas. I was fired, and the beginning, I guess you could say, of the end began. You've all heard me talk about good old Aunt Jewell. And Aunt Jewell was my dad's baby sister, who was a big drunk. And of course later she was also, she never said this, but I know she was a big old dyke, because she once said, Tommy, I've been married 3 times and I'm still a virgin, And anyway, she was a woman who was kind of in and out of AA for a long time. In fact, when I had gone to Casablanca, and I knew she was an alcoholic, I learned now where I could take her when I needed to put her someplace, so I could go get her and put her in there and not have to worry about her. And one time, though, she joined the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she took me to the suburban group, and of course she was in the alcoholic side, and they put me in the Al-Anon room. I was drunk, but I went, and I was there. And she was one of those alcoholics who, she would get sober, go to AA, and then get good. And when she got good, she was a Southern Baptist, and once she got good, she would have a little glass of sherry. And as soon as she had that little glass of sherry, she'd be back on the merry-go-round again. So here I am. Let's just say it was hell. I drank way too much. My life was getting much more unmanageable. I opened a little place called the Greenhouse on Fairmount. I'm sure you remember it. And it was a plant boutique. I had $25,000 that I used to open the place with, and I spent probably $6,000 on our party, just for our grand opening, And I could have just taken that money and thrown it out the window on North Central Expressway and perhaps had a better effect than what I did. But so had that, ended up living with that guy that asked me if I'd been to any of the bars. We lived in an old duplex in East Dallas. No water, no gas, no electricity. We'd get the hose from downstairs and bring it up for the water. But we did have 2 telephone lines. And so one day in the spring of 1976, I think, I'll try to find Jewell. What's she doing? And she mentioned she had a friend who lived here in Dallas, Nancy Canning Peterson. And Nancy was a member of the Preston group of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I just remembered the name. And that's back when you could open up a phone book and find a name in it, and there was a number, And there was a number, and I called her up, and I said, "This is Tommy Hooper." And she said, "Well, Jewell's here. Why don't you meet us for lunch?" And I said, "Well, okay." And that was Saturday, and that was in April of 1976. And we met at the Black Eyed Pea on Cedar Springs in those little pews. And I'm sitting in one of those little pew seats, and Jewell and Nancy were across the street. And of course they said, "Well, Tommy, just because we're sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous and don't drink, that doesn't mean you can't have a drink if you don't want one." And I said, "Oh, no, thank you." And Nancy said that at least 3 or 4 times. And I said, "No, thank you." And she looked at me and she said, "Do you think you might have a drinking problem?" And I said, "I know I have a drinking problem." And that was on Saturday. She called me on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and on Thursday. I said, "I'm going to go to one of those goddamn AA meetings and get that lady off my back." And of course, she took me to the Preston group of Alcoholics Anonymous in April of 1976. Now, in McKinney, Texas, about a half a block off the square, in an upstairs, a walk-up, I guess you'd call it, of an old building, there was big old windows, double hung, and you could see the bare light bulb, on the ceiling as you drove by. And on the door, down on the first level, there was like the symbols of AA, but they weren't symbols. They looked like me taking my left hand and putting A, And that's what I thought AA was. Golly, that's what AA is going to be like. And I ended up at Preston, and there were these beautiful people. I mean, there were women there with beautiful clothes on and expensive handbags and great jewelry and lots of handsome and good-looking men. And that was my introduction to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, we say in Alcoholics Anonymous, just because you've come to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't mean you've taken your last drink, but you have probably enjoyed your last drink. And that, of course, is what happened to me. I would go to meetings, for a week or so. And on Friday, when I ran to see that guy that asked me if I'd ever been to any of the bars, and he'd say, "You want a beer?" I'd say, "Sure," and I'd take one. And so during that period of time, literally every week I was getting a desire chip and coming back, getting a desire chip and coming back. I went to my high school class reunion in May of 1976. Of course, I can't go to a class reunion and not be a sophisticated person from Dallas, Texas, in the podunk town of McKinney, Texas. So I got there and blacked out. As soon as I walked through the door, I was in a blackout. I didn't come out of the blackout until we were getting in the car to come back to Dallas. So I went to my high school class reunion and missed it. And next day, back in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I have what I call my second longest continuous period of sobriety. And that was from May the 25th through June the 10th. And I was going to Preston, and there was a man there. This is not what perhaps he said, but this is what I heard him say. What he said is, "Tom, we as alcoholics have taken all our lives, and the only way we're ever going to receive anything is to ask for it. Is everything okay?" And of course, I'd say everything's fine. "Oh, everything's fine." And he kept doing that over and over. And this was actually Nancy's ex-husband that who she'd married in AA and then divorced in AA. But anyway, he asked me that question again and again. And of course, they'd ask me, is everything okay? Everything's fine. And I had I had my car and living in that no electricity duplex in East Allen. But, I couldn't keep the payments up. And so what did I do? They called me up and said, bring it in. And I just brought it in. And there was some insanity there because I had a car that had, I could have just taken it to a dealer and gotten, I think it was $2,500 for it, And, but no, they just took it. And I only owed like $1,000 more on it. And but I couldn't tell anybody that, I couldn't tell you guys what was going on in my life, anything. So they took the car. I'm just so depressed. What am I going to do? And so I hitchhiked up to Denton, Texas, where my aunt lived, and walked into her house, and she was drunk on the floor in her living room. So what do? You grab her car keys and take the money out of her wallet and get her car and drive back to Dallas, and which is what I did. She ended up in a little treatment facility out in Arizona. Nancy arranged it, I found out, after this kind of thing. But here I am in that last drunk, June the 10th through the 21st of June, 1976. And I kept hearing that thing of, it's the first drink that gets you drunk. When a train runs over you, it's the engine, not the caboose. You don't have to ride the garbage truck all the way to the dump. There were drunks that talked about they only drank out of square bottles because they didn't roll around in the car. I did take that into account, and because they didn't roll around, and I kept just doing it, and it was until one day I just kind of came to, and didn't know what to do other than to call AA again. Of course, I couldn't call Preston. I'd failed. I couldn't call the Preston group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And at that time, there was a group called the Alpha Group, which was out way north in Spring Valley on the other side of LBJ. And, they came and got me. I lived in Oak Lawn. In fact, I just used to live like a block and a half down Dickinson. And they came and got me, took me all the way out to North Dallas. And sitting there in their little office at the Alpha Group. And actually, one of the things that was so funny was remembering that they had just moved into their space. And so I'm sitting in the office, and there's the lady behind the desk that was going to answer the phone. And the telephone man comes in and says, now, where's this phone? Where are the phones that don't work? She pointed at, the one on the desk. And he said, well, now, where's it plugged in? And she said, I don't know. And he picked up the phone and took the little end, that little clip, and looked around and pulled the chair back and went click, and the phone was fixed. And and that lady's ex-husband was a guy named Tommy B, who was a member of the Preston group. And he took me back here to Oak Lawn, and we sat at the old Lucas B&B. And he told me that we sat there for 35 or 40 minutes, and he didn't understand one complete sentence I said. And but that was the beginning. And of course, as I said, if this didn't work, I could always kill myself. But luckily, I didn't. And luckily, I heard things just the first week in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that I still keep and use today. In fact, if there's a newcomer that's in a meeting, I always say this. There was a guy out there I was, my first week, and there was this guy named Lewis C., who was a Presbyterian minister, I found out later, who had 25 or so years of sobriety, and here he was at the meeting, and he basically said, the reason I continue to come to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is I have to be continually reminded I'm one of those persons that gives alcohol a bad name. And that's true. I gave alcohol a bad name. And so it's just it was the beginning of this journey. And now I've got to wrap this up. This is the worst part. 45 years, our adventures before and after, that's the adventures after are really the ones that I can say I'm kind of ashamed of in lots of ways, because on June the 21st, 1976, the only thing that changed was my breath. And I had to begin this process that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, allows me to do, and allows me to look at myself and continue to, move on this journey of, one of the other things I heard there in the beginning was, Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't tell me to do anything. It just tells me to stop doing the things that hurt me, which then that makes sense. That made sense to me. And I was 14 months sober. And of course, once you sober up and are not drinking, your life just improves considerably. And I went to meetings, on weekends I could go to Preston and Belmont in the 24-hour club and for that barefoot midnight meeting. And so I went to lots of meetings, but I was 14 months sober, and one day I had this terrible pain in my chest. Oh my God, my arm's hurting. And so I went to Parkland, and they give me the EKG, and the guy says, "Oh, you're okay. You just had an anxiety attack." And I went back to Preston that night and said, this terrible ordeal I had, and of course, what do they say? Have you done your 4-step yet? And which I hadn't. Interestingly enough, in Wired magazine back in 2010, there was an article that basically what Bill Wilson didn't know, and the fact that this front caudal cortex, or what it is in the front part of our brain, is that part of the brain that controls our anxiety responses, and of course that's the part that alcohol and drugs, stop. It makes them feel good, kind of thing. But as soon as you sober up, all that anxiety returns. And but if you begin the process of working the 12 steps of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and writing down those fears and all those resentments, and you tell somebody all your life story, and they sit there and they're yawning while you're telling them your life story, and that's the anxiety is just lessened so much. And that's kind of the beginning of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. A friend of mine now I heard him refer to it as the sober side of 5. It's very important to finally make it to the sober side of the 5th step, and which is such a wonderful thing that happened. Recently, I have, that book, Drop the Rock. I'm sure a lot of you have read it and been to little workshops on it. Has been a great eye-opener for me about working my 10th step, essentially, and looking back at all those character defects that I have, in a lot of ways, ignored for the last 45 years, or tried not to act on them, that kind of thing. And I use all kinds of things. But here I am. I do my 4th step and do my 5th step. And I can say the adventure began. The adventure really did begin. And, we've used to live a block and a half there. Lambda was 200 yards that way. This was the center of town. This was where Alcoholics Anonymous, where I lived, and the whole bit. The great late King T. Solomon just lived right over here, And it was a great little kind of close-knit community that I got to enjoy in my early days of sobriety. And so we keep on moving. I lose my mom and dad in the 1980s. That was pretty traumatic, because I was a baby. And I miss my mommy and daddy. I still do. But back then, I really missed them. And I declared bankruptcy in 1992. That was not pleasant because, again, my character defects and my ego. In fact, Lucy was my accountant at the time. And 9 months prior to that, she says, Tommy, you're losing money. Why are you doing this? And this is in 1992. Okay, I've been sober, 14, 16 years? And you're losing money. You just need to close that place and stop. Well, don't tell an alcoholic to stop. I mean, I've had to take it all the way to the cliff, and which I did. And So it ended up declaring bankruptcy. And the thing about it, though, was all of you all were there. Charlie Stewart. Charlie helped me every day. He walked me through each day, living one day at a time. He actually was from then, in 1992 or 93, that we had our daily phone calls until 2005. And so this program has just been such a lifesaver. It's been so much fun. Gotten to meet all you crazy people. What else could I say? I think basically I've probably have kind of said enough. The program works. Somebody once asked Bill Wilson, "How does Alcoholics Anonymous work?" He said, "Just fine." It works just fine. It does. You just try it. That's all you have to do. And this ego, my ego, constantly needs to be deflated and put in its proper place. And I have to learn what I'm supposed to do, which is, become an other-centered person as opposed to a self-centered person. In the last number of years, there's a columnist in the New York Times, David Brooks, who, in fact, he's the guy who sent me to that article in Wired magazine in 2010. And he told about his experience with people who were members of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he's actually been on his own journey because I think in 2013 he was divorced at the height of his career, the height of his income. And he was totally miserable and he didn't know what to do. And he began this process of, he wrote a book called The Road to Character, which was based on a column that he wrote about the eulogy virtues and the resume virtues. Okay, and the fact that we as human beings, I have two things. I have my resume virtue, which is the one I want you, my professional job. These are all the wonderful things I've done, blah, blah, blah. But they're not going to use that at my funeral. They're going to talk about the other ones. What are the things what's the good things you have done? And what kind of person were you? Were you a good friend? Were you honest? Were you sincere? Did you live a life of virtue? That kind of thing. And so I read that. And it all has to do with figuring out in some way how I can become an other-centered person as opposed to a self-centered person. And that's what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. For a selfish, self-centered, arrogant, egotistical person like me, I have to be hitting over the head and, be forced to figure out how do I get out of myself, what are the things that I need to do. And of course, it's basically, come to these meetings. You all realize that I'm just as close to a drunk as anybody else is in this room. It's a long time between drinks that I've been here. But I had to, maintain this momentum. I had to sustain my program on a daily basis. I had to continue to look for things that keep me, on the path. A guy, sponsor, introduced me to the Daily Stoic, and which is this great little email that I get every day. And it's a book based on the great Stoics of the Roman era and their writings, and they put together all this stuff. And it's so practical. One of the recent ones was that I don't need anyone's approval, because as soon as I seek other people's approval, I'm losing my, I guess you could say virtue, but I need to be a witness unto myself. So these are the things that continue to keep me sober. Continue, seek, and look, and wash. The 10th and 11th steps are what keep me here. Lather, rinse, repeat, and over and over and over again. And this program works just great. I'm such an egomaniac. Of course, I told you that. I have 3 closings here, so. I've got to choose one of 3. I can't read all 3 of them because that's a little too much. But I have one that I first heard when I was in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I looked for it for years and years and years. So I guess I'll use that one. It's one of my favorites. Okay. Now, don't cry. Imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps you can understand what he is doing. He is getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof and so on. You knew those jobs needed doing, and so you were not surprised. But presently, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make any sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of. Throwing out a new wing here, or putting on an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were being made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. He intends to come and live it in himself. Thank you.